Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking the
August.
time to speak with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you, August.
Your book, One Ordinary Man, a novel based on the true story of Harry Hopkins, has gotten off to an incredible start since its release just a few months ago. Recognized by multiple awards, many accolades, is an Amazon best-selling book. Why do you think the book is having so much success with readers?
I think what the interesting thing about it is that when I started out to do this project, I wanted to my goal was just simply to tell the story of Harry Hopkins well, and without any other motive other than that. And it seems really, without my realizing it, the story seems to resonate with people today for some incredible reasons. Apparently, the story seems to speak to many of the issues that people are experiencing today, and seems to provide some sort of hope and inspiration that America has been through really tough stuff in the past, and with moral leadership and courage, it has prevailed. So I think one of the reasons is its themes, if you will, the book's story and its themes about the incredible grit and courage of these people who lived through those really dark days. I mean, it was from 1933 to 1945. It was literally one crisis after another. I think it resonates to people that guess what, we're going to make it out of whatever we feel like our challenges are today. If those folks could do it, we certainly can. And I think that's part of the reason why it's been successful. I think folks are finding inspiration in that underlying message, though I have to tell you honestly, that was not my intent when I wrote it.
So, within your research, what surprised you the most when you took a deep dive into Harry Hopkins' story and his life?
Yeah, so it was a real surprise for me because I had known of Harry Hopkins, like many people do, right? We anyone who's read a modern U.S. or European history book inevitably will bump into Harry Hopkins' name along the way, and I had heard of him, and I kind of knew of him, and I thought I knew what he was about. But when I went in under the covers and really did a deep dive into his life, I began to understand just how important and profound his work was in guiding America through arguably one of the most critical periods of America's history. You know, the of course the revolution. We all know that that was obviously probably the most critical point in our history, and then of course the Civil War. But from 1933 to 1945, those 12 years were arguably certainly in the top three periods of American history because of the really catastrophic events that took place during that period of time, leading off with the Great Depression, then followed up by the only the worst war humanity has ever seen. Right. So, I mean, that was I think when I did the deep dive, his work just astounded me, and frankly, it inspired me. It was for me the hero's journey of this young. Relatively young man. He was, I guess, in his 40s when he first got to Washington, and he, you know, here he is. He's unknown to anyone, and he's facing crisis after crisis after crisis, and he's winning the battle. And ultimately, in 1945, he emerges victorious. So, and by the way, becomes viewed as the most powerful man in the world after Franklin Roosevelt died. So here's this guy who comes from obscurity, a former social worker, who grows over 12 years to become the most powerful man in the world. And to me, that just captured my imagination for sure.
You mentioned Hopkins had a relationship with Winston Churchill. Uh, why do you think Hopkins was able to create such important relationships with people like FDR,
Yeah.
Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, George Marshall, and others?
His intellect and his emotional intelligence. His emotional intelligence was off the charts. He was incredibly emotionally intelligent, and he was also smart, savvy, and focused on the what he perceived to be his duty. And so it was really that drove many of those relationships, specifically with FDR and with Churchill, rather. And in fact, as I write in the book, Churchill called him Lord Root of the matter. When Churchill was waxing eloquent one night over after dinner about what he thought Hopkins wanted to hear about his Churchill's commitment to humanity and human rights and all the rest of it, Hopkins said, we really don't care about any of that stuff. We just want to see that Hitler gets beat or gets licked, is the words that he used. And P.S. to the story is Churchill looked at him and said, "You are, it seems, Lord Root of the matter." And that title, if you will, stuck with him forever. After that, he became known as Lord Root of the matter.
Yeah, he knew how to get things done. He knew how to intermingle with these historical figures.
He was direct, and he was right. He went right. He cut to the chase and always took on the heart of the issue rather than dancing around the issue. He was really a remarkable, remarkable guy, and he had the emotional intelligence and savvy to navigate people, to help people navigate to achieve the things that he wanted them to achieve. So it was really pretty interesting. There's another part to that story that I think is worth saying. And in Churchill's case, in particular, Churchill's receptivity to Hopkins, for sure, was born out of, or was helped by, maybe not born out of, but was certainly aided by the desperation he felt in those years. I mean, in those years, England was literally at the point of collapse. They were broke. The German army was across the Pas de Calais. They could see the German army from Dover, preparing to invade them. The German army was sending over shells from a rail gun over in the Pas de Calais. They were about to be invaded. They were the standalone. They were the last remaining democracy in Europe. They were all by themselves. London was truly, in those years, the prototypical sanctuary city. I know we use sanctuary city here nowadays in a different way, but they were a sanctuary for anyone who wanted to flee continental Europe to safety. They tried to get to London or to Lisbon to get off of continental Europe and over to the United States. So it was really desperation, and clearly some of his receptivity to Hopkins was based on that desperation.
There are a few very funny episodes in the book, like the one with Churchill coming out of his bath in the White House, yes. George Marshall being fired by Hopkins. Are they true?
Yes, they are. They're all true.
Really?
Yeah, they are all true. And in fact, the Marshall story is really interesting. The Churchill story is a pretty famous one, and that's been floating around for years. And in fact, some people, Hopkins used to tell that story, and some people said it never happened, but according to Hopkins, it did. So I say it's absolutely true, the story. He also said, by the way, one of the things that Churchill also said was, as they were leaving the room that night, he said, "I believe I'm the only statesman in the world that's ever received another statesman completely naked." So so he was pretty much, he was a character, right? So
for people that might not know the stories, could you give a quick summary of the George Marshall or the Churchill coming out of the bath story?
Yeah, they were trying to find a name for the communique out of the Arcadia Conference, which was the conference that they had in the White House immediately after Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. And Churchill was living there. He was living in the White House, right across the hall from Hopkins' rooms, and down the hall from FDR's rooms in the White House. And FDR and Hopkins were reviewing the communique that they were going to put out about the the Associated Powers, which were the 20 odd countries that had lined up to say that they were on the side of Great Britain and the United States. And they used that term, Associated Powers, but they really didn't like it. So they said, as they were talking about it, FDR had this, the light bulb went on, and he said, we should call ourselves the United Nations. And they were excited to share the news with Churchill. So Hopkins takes FDR's wheelchair, he wheels him down the hall, and they just burst into Churchill's room. Churchill comes out of the bathtub, and he's standing there naked when they come through the door. and of course FDR was really embarrassed. He was absolutely embarrassed, as was Hopkins. And and Churchill said, "You see, Mr. President, the Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." and then as he walked away and they were leaving the room, he said, I believe I am the only statesman ever to receive another statesman completely naked. So yeah,
it's really awesome.
It was pretty. The George Marshall story was also interesting. Because the newspapers, and it was really, today we call it the media then had said that Hopkins was engineering George Marshall's termination because he wanted to put a guy by the name of Brett Somerville, who was also a general, in his place. And they thought that because Brett Somerville had worked with Hopkins on some of the programs in the WPA back in the day. So the media conjured up this conspiracy theory that he was really trying to figure out how to do that, and it was a joke. It was, of course, it was not the case. So George Marshall wrote a note to Hopkins, and he said, "I hear that you're behind this, that you're responsible for me being fired," or something like that. And he was joking, of course, right? So Hopkins brings the note to FDR, and they're laughing about it. And FDR said, "Give me the note." And we know this, by the way, to be true because that note still exists. It's in the archives, and FDR's handwriting is on the note. And he wrote back to Marshall. FDR wrote on the note, "Not true, George, but I am now chief of staff and you're now the president." So it was the media kind of similar to some of the stories we hear today. The media had conjured up this great conspiracy theory. And of course, Hopkins, they were always accusing Hopkins of something or other. And he was behind it, but he had nothing to do with it. He had no idea what it was.
What are your personal favorite parts of this book?
I have many. There are many parts actually that really resonate with me and that I enjoy the most. Certainly the scenes. There are scenes that come to mind more than parts, right? There are like certain scenes that come to mind. Yeah. The scene of Churchill, Clementine, Pug Ismay, and Harry Hopkins trying to get to the destroyer in Scotland on that night when that event actually happened, and they're trying to cross from one ship to another to the destroyer, and Hopkins almost fell. And he was literally hanging between the two ships in this very rough sea, and it could have gone really badly for him. Fortunately, quick thinking sailors pulled him up and got him on the ship. That is certainly one of the scenes for me. He was as we know now, he was a very fragile guy. I mean, his health was really serious, and he was frozen solid. I mean, the poor guy was really in bad health and frozen solid. And the idea that he was, doing that because of his sense of duty was, to me, remarkable. The other scene that kind of follows almost immediately after that is he was trying to get out of the cold on the destroyer, and he sits down on a piece of metal on the ship to get out of the wind. And the British captain came down from his bridge, and he stands in front of him and says, "Excuse me, sir," he said, "but you may want to get up from there." And he says, "Why?" And he said, "Because you're sitting on a live depth charge." And so Hopkins bounced up and moved over to the moved over to the thing. And Churchill said, "Imagine me having to explain that one to Franklin Roosevelt." So yeah, so there are scenes like that all throughout the book that really that I enjoy and certainly resonate with me for sure.
I really hope that it gets adapted. I really hope that it gets adapted because just the way that you have laid out the entire book in terms of scenes and in terms of everything is so ready to be made. It's so
Oh, how nice of you! Thank you. That's really
so.
nice to hear that. Thank you.
What is next for One Ordinary Man?
So we, I am trying now. Actually, had a call this morning, and we'll have another call tomorrow. I am trying now to find someone to represent it to Hollywood production companies to see if we can get it produced into a 9-part TV series. As you know, August, I've already written the 9-part series is already written. It's already done. And so
Yeah,
with the success of the novel and with the really the story's resonance with readers, um,
yeah,
I think it's a good timing to start the process of trying to find someone to represent it within the Hollywood community. There's also the issue of moving the story, the novel in particular, as well as the story, foreign rights, which is a
yeah.
whole different kettle of fish. So those are the next things in terms of the business or of One Ordinary Man. But the story itself, I still go back to what I always believed, which was that my goal was to tell the story well. I, I
Mm.
I'm starting to believe I have done that. I think I have told this story well, and I'm hopeful that we can now have as many people as possible learn about him and learn about it.
I truly believe that it is resonating with such a wide audience, the historians, the World War II fiction, lovers, or people that are just, everyday Americans and thinking about leadership, thinking about the future, what kind of a leadership are we looking for in the future?
Yeah,
I, and it really,
yeah. For
it's
me,
really grounding. It's a really grounding story.
so for me, one of that's really interesting, August, because for me, those I obviously love all. I say in advance, I love all the good reviews, right? I love good reviews for sure, right? I love when people are happy with the book and they get
Mm-hmm.
something from it. But the ones that particularly stand out for me are those from people who say things like, "I don't usually read this sort of book, but
Yeah.
boy, this really is important. This is an important book. Everyone should read this. This is speaks to so many things that going on in our world. And again, as I said to you at the beginning, earlier in the interview, it's not, I certainly wasn't thinking about any of that when I decided to write his story. I was really thinking about just trying to tell his story well, which I thought was a really inspirational story about a really inspirational guy who had a tremendous amount of courage, a tremendous amount of integrity, and an unbelievable amount of grit. He had this tenacity to do and go after the things that he thought were important, not for performance, not for his own personal ambition, but because he felt it was his duty to do that for the greater good of his country. And for me, that was like, wow, what an incredible guy, what an incredible story. So that was the goal. The other stuff is just kind of followed that
Hold it.
story. Yeah, it's really very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
That's all we have time for. Before we go, where can people find One Ordinary Man?
On Amazon.com, you can find there are three possible versions of it. One is the ebook, the Kindle version. The other is the paperback, and the last but not least is the audiobook, which is done by a great guy, Philip Nathaniel Freeman, who did a spectacular job in bringing the book to life on as an audiobook. Also can find it at Barnes and Noble and Kobo as well. I mean, I think there's a number of different places where folks can kind of pick it up.
Amazing.